So, I have been developing some technology for automating sewing factories. But first, we can all start together where I started and wonder why there isn't more automation in sewing factories to begin with. Okay, so the problem with robots and fabric handling is that fabric is soft. It curls up on itself, it can fold on itself, it can sway in the breeze, and it's very unpredictable. This is why traditionally we've required human operators to use their perception and their hands, their fine motor skills, to do all of the material handling that goes into sewing operations. Here you see a robot at the University of Berkeley in California attempting to fold a towel. As you can see, this is actually a time-lapse video. And it can take, I believe, up to 12 minutes, actually, to fold a single, simple towel. This is a great illustration of the challenges that robots traditionally face when handling materials. They need to use a tremendous amount of complicated sensors and software to even begin to understand what's going on with a piece of material, where it is, whether it's under tension, whether it's in the right place for the sewing machine. And for this reason, we've seen very, very little automation when it comes to actual sewing machine operations. So with this realization, and the inspiration that our MC mentioned, I was very pleased to learn about this water-soluble thermoplastic, which is used in 3D printing. And as soon as I learned of this, I realized that it was a perfect solution for the problems that robots face when handling fabrics. So I've developed this technique to temporarily stiffen fabric using this water-soluble thermoplastic. It's actually non-toxic. It's already in widespread use in the industry, where it's used as sizing to temporarily strengthen yarn during weaving. But in this situation, we actually prepare it as a film and apply it to whole cloth so that it can be handled in a very predictable way. Here in my hand, I actually have a piece of denim. Maybe not what you would recognize as denim, but I promise that as soon as it's dipped in warm water, it returns to its original state. This material can be heated up and molded as needed into any shape. So if you were preparing a sleeve, you could heat it up and well, this is stiff, so I can't do it here. But if you find me later, I actually have some tools and can do a hands-on demonstration for you. You're also welcome to find me and see the material for yourself. But if it's heated up, it can be molded into any shape. It will cool down, and it will retain that shape for as long as you need. It can also be temporarily welded to itself. This means that you can start to look at a clothing factory as if it were actually a car factory. And this allows you to use robots that we've found in other industries for many years, and all sorts of techniques that you would find in factories for sheet metal handling or plastic handling. And we can bring these into sewing factories and start to introduce the same automation tools that have been put to such great use in other spaces. As I mentioned, it rinses off in warm water. Once it's rinsed off, it can actually be recovered and reused in a closed-loop manufacturing process. So it doesn't have any terrible environmental aspects. It is non-toxic, and it leaves no residue on the finished products. If you find me later, if you're curious, you can see the materials, and I'd also be happy to share with you the demonstration video, which shows a universal robot handling material and tending a sewing machine, performing all of the sewing operations that are required to make a t-shirt. So I have here in my hand what I understand to be the world's first robotically sewn t-shirt. It's not the best quality, but the robot actually did sew every single stitch in this garment, and I think it's a pretty great place to start for an industry that's been struggling to incorporate automation tools. You're welcome to see this as well. So, I unveiled this a little over a year ago, longer now actually, and have been very pleased to find a very positive reception from the industry. My intuition was that there might be some skepticism given the long history of automation not really finding a role in this space. However, I've been pleased to find that people are actually quite desperate for automation. Everybody seems to have a different goal in mind. Some people are interested in preparing products closer to the target markets, but actually in many of the dominant garment production regions, there's also a tremendous amount of interest in automation to deal with some of the complexities of operating an apparel factory. So with robots, as the gentleman from UR mentioned, you don't have to worry about sick days or coffee breaks or anything like this. And you can use workers for their intelligence and for their perception to do quality control and things like this. But when it comes down to the actual hands-on at-the-needle sewing operations, you can rely on robots instead to ensure high throughput, run 3 shifts a day, no issues, things like this. It has the potential to really change the nature of a sewing factory. Since I unveiled the product, I've been pleased to receive hundreds of inquiries from over a dozen countries. Pretty much any space where apparel is made, I've received a great deal of interest in incorporating these tools into existing sewing operations. I've also received quite a few inquiries from places where it's really not practical to open any significant sewing operations, but with these tools, the possibilities are now on the table. So where I am today is actually not too far from this. The technology is still in its infancy. It'll be many years before this is developed to a scale that it will be used in very large factories and enough to make a major impact on the industry. However, the short-term goals are to start with difficult-to-handle materials and relatively simple goods, and then over time, as the technology matures, to start to produce more complex goods. And hopefully, eventually, this technology will actually be applicable for almost every sewn good on the planet. This material is soluble in water, so everything we're working with today is intended to be rinsed in water. However, there are analogous processes for dry clean only goods. So everything we discuss here is applicable to wool or silk, pretty much anything that can be rinsed through. So not hides, not solid plastics, but pretty much everything else. So right now, today, SOBO is still gathering resources and pulling teams together to develop this technology. Of course, given the complexities and the massive scale of the apparel industry, developing tools that will be useful across the industry is quite challenging, and it's a long road ahead. And that means that when we start to talk about the impacts of automation, we can speak with a very long horizon. So, I believe that the future is quite bright for automation in this industry. I think that the space is primed. As labor costs rise and technology costs fall, we can start to look at all sorts of advanced tools and begin to dream of how we may incorporate these into our industry. The first thing that most people wonder when they hear about this technology is what the impact of this shift will be on the industry, and in particular on regions that leverage low-cost labor to dominate the industry today, much like Bangladesh. So robots, they do not eliminate the demand for labor. They do reduce it, but actually the need for hands-on labor is still very real, but it's more oriented towards quality control. You need to be able to pick up a finished good and tug at the seams and make sure that everything is where it needs to be. And once the material is rinsed off, once you have a finished good, you're dealing with the same issues that you would in any other apparel handling situation. So this requires quite a few workers at any substantial scale to make sure that all of the quality is as it would be expected to. There are also need for many workers to maintain the sewing machines and the robots, and I think you would find an automated factory would still be quite busy and not too dissimilar from what you would see in a factory today. So there are some risks, however. Forgive me, we're looking at the wrong deck, so this doesn't go all in order. So when we talk about the impact of automation, we do have to acknowledge that there are some risks associated with this, not necessarily with eliminating all of the labor that you would find in a factory, but it does create the potential for a geographic relocation and some changes in the way the supply chains are managed today. Bangladesh's current role in the industry leaves it very well positioned to take advantage of these technologies. Because you have the customers in place, because you have the industrial expertise, which is still very much required to operate an automated sewing factory, that means that investing in technology today and positioning Bangladeshi factories to use these tools will allow it to continue to play a major role in the industry. But, as I said, it may inspire some geographic shifts, and there are risks associated with this. Additionally, the industry's long history of periodic migration may be amplified by this technology. So, given the risks, I think that it's quite important that we start discussing this very seriously today. Actually, I've been reading the papers, the newspapers here, since I started on this project out of curiosity to see whether these technologies were being discussed seriously, whether the threats were being taken seriously, and I think most of the discussion I've seen about modern technology and how it may impact the industry has come from our host here, Mr. Mostafitz, who's written several times about what this may mean for the industry, and so I encourage you to look into some of this as well. I think his perspective is very valuable. So, there is a lot of potential for Bangladesh and this technology. There are some risks, and I think that the risks are too serious to completely ignore, and it's good to start looking at this technology today. So, when you look at a factory today, this may not be an unfamiliar sight if you are making markers or something like this. Actually, this is a meme from the robotics industry, which was passed around humorously to say you would never in a million years see this in a modern engineering firm. However, this is commonplace in apparel factories. And so I think that to be very well positioned to take advantage of these technologies, it's important to have events like this, to start looking at the cutting edge technologies and make sure that they're being implemented, that you're not relying on what is a very understandable fallback of relying on low-cost labor to do things that very expensive tools could do for you. Even though it may make sense on paper economically today, I think that it would be disadvantageous in the long term to rely only on low-cost labor to do things like preparing markers or anything basically that the technology exists today, cutting tables or all of this. Please feel free to reach out directly if you have any questions. Feel free to find me here. I have, as I say, samples and tools, and I'd be happy to do hands-on demonstrations for you and answer any questions you have. Thank you all so much.